skip a day or two, and then go back to the same piece, go through, and then you'll be able to identify your errors. You do self-editing. And then other issues still in being correct and consistent in your writing. Then we look at issues regarding the numbers. When should you write the figures? And when you should you write the figures in words? We're going to find that at the beginning of the sentences, we don't expect anyone to write figures. Like say figure 12, maybe 12 farms participated. If you're beginning a sentence and you're writing a figure, that figure should be written in words, not figures. Then introducing abbreviations, because I've seen people who use abbreviations when they haven't used them earlier. But if you expect to use abbreviations for certain words, then at the beginning, you first write the word and then the abbreviation in brackets. And then in the rest of the parts of the work, you can continue using the abbreviation only. But there are situations where a student uses an abbreviation, yet it is nowhere to be identified. Then somebody begins struggling with the interpretation. What does this person mean when it comes to this abbreviation? Then using the right tenses, that in most cases we use present simple, past simple, and then present perfect tense while writing. And I'm going to show you when should you use present simple, when should you use present past, and when should you use present perfect. Frank, I'm going to give you a chance and you speak. Then we have capitalization of terms and headings. When should you use or write all the headings in capital letters? And then when should you write them maybe in a sentence format? And when should you have maybe each capital, when should you have some words capitalized in a title or a heading? It could be a subheading or it could be a general heading. Like if you're writing a chapter, maybe chapter 2, we expect that the words should be capital. All words, the word chapter and 2, they should all be capital. And then when it comes to methodology, we expect that the word methodology will be capital. And then when we are introducing the different parts of the methodology, say for example, research design, we expect the word research to have capital R and then design to have capital what? Capital D. So we need to know when to capitalize the terms or heading. Then we come to punctuation differences, where we see some computers have maybe UK English and then others have US English. So say for example, the word organization, in some they use S and in another they use Z. So you have to decide, are you using UK English throughout, or you're going to use the US English throughout? And maybe you find out what is desired by the academic institution. Do they use UK or US, or they are not bothered on which kind of English you use in your piece of work? Frank, you had a question?
Thank you, Professor. Good evening, Professor. Good evening, my colleagues on call. My question, I don't know if I'm loud and clear.
You're loud.
My question was bothering me. You talked about the background of the study.
Yes.
And I was wondering, because this is my first time to do research, I'm starting from, of course, from zero. So I was thinking and comparing, is background of the study the same as a research concept? Because at the point when we are looking for the supervisors, the first thing they told us to first do is the concept. And to be honest, I struggled. I asked, of course, my colleagues, they helped me. So I was thinking, I don't know if it's the background of the study, the same as the research concept. I'd like to submit. Thank you.
Yeah, if you're talking about a research concept, it could have one, the problem you want to study, and then, of course, what has been done, which could be close to the background, what has been done or no dependent, what hasn't been done, which is now your research gap, and then what is the relationship between the variables I've identified as my gaps, and then what is the problem. Though most people first look at the problem statement. That is where most people's interest is. But you should have the background and the problem statement. And then your concept should have a well-stated. Because people look at the topic, look at the background, and then your problem. And then they will understand what you want to do. So once those things are clear, and maybe the conceptual framework, by the time you go to your supervisor, you should have a sketch of the conceptual framework. So your conceptual framework, your background, and be enough to research concepts. So clear. Frank, is that?
I'm trying to, I don't know if I missed some stuff. Last lecture I was in, but my phone went off. Even just coming up with the concept. Yeah? I don't know if I missed something with the concept, with the proposals.
We are going to write, I shared the document for the different parts that make up a proposal as per the Makerere format. Then for the research, last time I said we identify a broad area where we want our research to be. Could it be supply chain or public procurement or sustainable procurement, or you want specifically sustainable supply chains? And then from there, we identify a dependent variable. Then I said, because in research we use a panel approach, we begin broad and then narrow down to the last, our specifics. So I said, once we identify those things, then like I've been talking about working backwards, that we now have the dependent variable. That is why everyone, by the time we meet, everyone should have a dependent. Then we go and read articles that have been written on that dependent. They need current ones for us to identify the research gap. And then from there, as you do that, you're also looking out for the problem, because we need a current source for our problem. And last time I said, if you can't get a current source, you'd rather go and interview 2 to 3 people to cite your problem, rather than giving us old sources for the problem, because that makes you lose marks. You'll be getting maybe 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, you get 2 or 1, even or 0 out of that, out of 5. So we talked about that, and I said next meeting I will be practical. We shall be now hands-on, that each person should come ready with their dependent variable and the context. And then we see how we search articles, how do we identify that this article is relevant, this one is not relevant, because some people may spend time on irrelevant articles. So we are going hands-on. I want the dependent and the context. Currently, we are just getting the tips on how to write, such that we don't do mistakes while we are writing. And then we are looking at long-winded or winded sentences. Here, you're going to find that some people may overcomplicate their sentences. Some, instead of using a word that could maybe cover up for 3 words, they could use long sentences. So you can find that here, in most cases, in terms of publishing, the editors will tell you to scale down the number of words. So when we have to scale down the number of words, that means that where we have, say, 3 words, we could get a word that can cover up all, but without changing the meaning. That is why here an example where a writer was saying, interest in this phenomenon carried on in the year 2018. And then in order for prove the statement and shorten it, then the writers wrote saying interest in this phenomenon continued in 2018. So you see, instead of saying carried on in the year 2018, how many words have been cut? To say continued in 2018, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here we only have 3 continued in 2018. So we should be able to be innovative and then avoid long-winded statements or even words where we can maybe put or use certain terms to reduce the number of words. Let's do that such that what we write is straightforward to the reader. Because you're not writing for yourself, but you're writing for somebody who is going to read your work. So as you write, you have to ask yourself that if I was in the position of the reader, would I have understood what has been written? So if then you try making the writer clear without using too many words to mean something. That we could use fewer words to refer to the same word, to the same thing. So you come across this when you're editing your work, because it is something all academicians or scholars do, that you reach a point when you have to reduce the words. And reducing the words means that you think about other phrases that you could use that could reduce the number of words you may be currently having in your write-up. Then we have repetition, very common with PhD students. With masters, I haven't seen for the dissertations I've marked, where people repeat stuff that you may find, though some people have done it when it comes to the problem statement and the background. That though we have a certain part in the background where you have to state the problem, but then we all know that the problem statement is summary for the background, what is wrong. Though some people just cut what is in the background under the problem and then they paste under the subsection for the problem statement. So when there is a lot of repetition, it becomes boring for the reader. The reader gets bored. That is why we see we avoid repetition. Repetition is seen in the conclusions. It's happened a lot. But once you see that the student is talking about the same things that have been written in the entire body of the subsection. And yet, if you're concluding, you have to use your own words to conclude. You want to copy exactly the same things that have been put or been included or written in the body of the subsection. So that is why good academic writing requires that we don't repeat things. We always have, if where necessary, we have to summarize or write things in our own ways, or such that we avoid repetition. Because repetition bores the reader, and it may result into loss of marks for people who may who may be very, very strict. So those are some of the characteristics of good academic writing. So we talked about tenses, which tenses we use. You see, I mentioned the present simple. I know we are going back to primary. If you have children at home, you ask them. Past simple, I went to school. And then the present perfect, using has been, have been, has. So you can find that when people are reporting or writing, they normally use passive or active voice in any, whether you're using present simple, you may use passive or active. Past simple, still some scholars use passive, others may use active voice, and then still present perfect. You find that still scholars may choose where there is need for passive voice, you'd use passive, and where there is need for active voice, you may use active voice. Like say in the discussion or presentation of findings, and even some parts of the introduction, we may use active voice, and in some parts we may use passive voice. So we have examples of the areas where we may use the different tenses first, and then I will show the areas where we may use active and still passive voice. So for the tenses, we have present simple, and here you find that with present simple, when should they be used? When we want to make statements that are generally true at the time of writing, we use present simple. And then when we want to make interpretation about findings of current or previous research, still we can use present simple. And then if we want to state the aim of our report or study, still we can use present simple. And then making references to charts, figures, tables, and paragraphs. Those ones are times in the methodology where maybe we have a table for reliability and content validity. If we want to refer to it in the text, we shall be using present simple. And then, of course, we've said interpretation of findings, we use present simple. And then if you are using those tables, referring to the tables in the findings section, then still the correlation tables, regression tables, etc. We can use present simple. And if there are figures, still we can use present simple, because there are certain situations when the findings say you tested for mediation and you have figures instead of what? Instead of tables. But then a question would be, how about when we are writing our proposal? Should we have the different tenses? In the proposal, it is completely future tense. Will throughout. We don't expect past. We don't expect present simple. We don't expect present perfect. But when we are writing our report, we don't expect future tense. Because I've seen students who, after they've collected data and they are writing their reports, they still have future tense, will, in it. And then that shows that this student didn't edit their work. They didn't edit. So we should master it that our proposals should be in future tense. And then the report will have to be structured using present simple and present perfect. Then some of the examples of the sentences, like we say many students apply to university during their A levels. And then we have say, for example, we can say findings suggest, which is very common when I share the articles. Then maybe this person suggests that ABC. Then others, the report explains or the table shows that is present simple. It is very common in findings. The results indicate, the results show. Maybe the report indicates that if we are reporting, say, problem, and we are expecting a problem from a report, we would say findings from the report indicate, or earlier research shows, or earlier scholars suggest, etc. Then we have past simple. Here we say, when should we use past simple? The normal past tense we use. And here we use past tense to describe previous findings in either somebody's piece of work or another's research. That would have been, so for example, replace that. We look at area research. Like when you're going to write your background, I've said in the first part, you talk about what has been done in relation to your dependent variable. So you're going to find that you're going to go to area research. So at times, a gap can be justified by the presence of conflicting findings. So you're going to find that maybe you can say, for example, Anna found that maybe information sharing negatively impacts supply chain performance. And then you say, for example, in addition or further, maybe Kennedy found that information sharing positively influenced supply chain performance. So you're saying influenced, found. We are using past tense, which is the simple, taken to be past simple tense. So you could compare findings, or if you're presenting findings from different scholars, you use past tense. We're going to find that if you're studying a concept and maybe, say, in one of the objectives, so if you have an objective of the relationship between information sharing and supply chain performance, and you find that all the consistent in terms of findings, that they are saying it has a positive influence. Say, for example, you find that scholars find, all of them find that information sharing has a positive influence on supply chain performance. We didn't proceed to examine that aspect. If you if you find that all scholars are finding the same thing, then you have nothing to study. You would rather change your independent variable. You change it. Otherwise, they will tell you that now that all scholars have found that information sharing impacts supply chain performance, what more do you want? Why are you studying something that has already been examined? So that is why we are saying this literature review helps us identify gaps. So we are saying our past simple could be used while talking about what has been done in area research, and then it could also be used to describe the data gathered. In the methods section, we're going to use past simple tense. Maybe the research design, maybe across sectional quantitative survey research design was used. The design was used because of ABC. You're using past simple. And then, of course, if and then also if you're making reports about specific points in the earlier research or in another person's research findings, but you're talking about or you're reporting findings of a previous study or specific point in the first order to support your general statement. Normally, Like I've said, some of them could be for the problem statement. They could be obtained from reports that you report what, say, the World Bank report says. You report, maybe if you're using PPDA audit reports, you state what the findings are in those reports, but this could be made to strengthen maybe the problem statements. So you find that maybe if you have another piece of work that you published in a similar line, still you could cite it but using, or you could state what was found but using past simple tense. And then here we have some of the examples where they use past simple tense. In the past and the present simple, we're saying suggests, argues. But here we are saying, here in the past simple, they're saying the theory of maternal impression suggested. So suggested is past simple. And then here we are saying the RSPA reported. And then the subjects were asked. We have past tense in the sentences, and you see the tense is bolded. And we've said if you are dealing with earlier findings or findings in earlier research, or even our personal research, because for us we normally publish papers in such a way that they follow each other. So I could cite my work, and then I could report something from my work, but I have to use past simple. And then if I'm presenting my method section, then in the method section, still I will have to use past tense. And then we go to present perfect simple tense. When we use this, we find that we could use it when we want to connect information from some time in the past with the present. Say, for example, if I want to have a chronology in the way events have unfolded in relation to a certain variable. Like say, if we look at sustainability, if we want to see how the sustainability aspect has evolved over time, say for example in the procurement and supply field, then present perfect simple would be the best. Others, if you're tracing the origin from the time the concept was coined by a seminal scholar to the time to date. When I did my concept in my PhD, I studied environmental orientation, which some people refer to as entrepreneurial environmental orientation. But I had to trace the origin of the term and even trace the originator, who was Varadarajan. I don't know whether he's still alive, but he was a professor in Michigan State University, and even gave me some articles to read when I contacted him. So when I find that, I traced the origin of that term, and somewhere we had these tenses. Somewhere we could have past, somewhere we could have the present perfect tense. So if you want to summarize previous research, still you can use present perfect simple tense. You're introducing a new topic, you could do that. And then if you want to show gaps, which we've been talking about, the research gaps which have to be shown in your background, and then literature review section. But when I'm examining the relationships between variables, I have to show the research gap. What could happen? What if I could be examining something that has already been examined? So the reader or the examiner wants to see the gaps. So if you're reporting these gaps, you use present perfect simple tense. And then limitations in your current research. Like, so for example, at the end of your research, in your chapter 5, you will have current the limitations from which you will have to derive the areas of what? Further research. Because we derive research from the limitations. And then, of course, when we are drawing conclusions, we are expected to use the present perfect simple tense. And then if we want to make emphasis on what has been done, instead of what is known still, we can use the present perfect simple tense. I want to say that most scholars have maybe focused on this and not the other. Like, you'll have to show that in your research. Like when I was studying the green supply chain practices, because they were part of my PhD work, you find that I had to find out which practices had been over-examined, and then which one had been examined, and I provide a reason why I thought they hadn't been examined. When it came to performance, because I had to examine environmental performance, the economic benefits for adopting green supply chain practices, and then the economic costs, which people used to refer to as negative economic performance. So again, find that, yes, I said people used to look at negative economic performance, but were not focusing on the cost element. And that was where my gap is. I was emphasizing that they have over-examined environmental performance and economic benefits, but they haven't ventured into ABC. So which showed that I had a contribution I was going to make towards knowledge. So here we have examples where we say present perfect. We say house prices in London have almost doubled. This have with the additional words. Then here we have shown. Earlier studies have shown that maybe the number of women getting married are more than the number of men who may be interested in marrying. Have shown, have developed. Here we are saying scientists have developed a new technique. Or researchers have developed interest in maybe the impact of sustainability in, say, public sector entities. Then we have the issue of wet markets has grown in importance. Or like we see that here we can say the issue of the use of the competence-based curriculum has grown in its importance. That we are seeing that even to PhD level, the competence-based curriculum is important, even at masters. And then we are seeing the other is that the current study has only examined. Here you're showing your research gap. Like how I've been saying that in my PhD research, I said earlier research had examined or had been focused on economic benefits and environmental performance, and they had not given significant attention to economic costs. And then when we draw conclusions, or if we are drawing conclusions for a given section, still we use that. Maybe this section has discussed or has presented ABC. So others may not use this, but the writers recommend that the conclusions should have present perfect simple tense used while they are being drafted. So those are the three tenses. So when we look at our manuscripts, when we look at the manuscripts, why should these tenses be used? So in the abstract, we normally use past simple tense for what we did and what we formed. But for conclusions, we may use present simple tense. And then for the introduction, we use present and present perfect, because we've seen we have to present gaps, and which gaps require present what? Simple tense. Present simple perfect what? Tense. And then literature review, we normally use the present simple perfect, and then somewhere we could use the past, and then the present tense. And then for methods, we use simple past, or some people say past simple what? Tense. And then results, we use past simple and present simple while referring to figures and tables. And then discussion, we use past simple while presenting the findings. Maybe the results indicated a significant positive maybe relationship between A and B. And then present tense, while present simple tense while making interpretations. That you could say maybe the findings indicate that, or they mean that ABC. Maybe an increase in this will result in an increase in ABC. And then maybe again you proceed and say the findings are obtain support, or others could say supported, which goes to past simple by earlier researchers. But or you could say the findings are in line with earlier research, and then that would be present simple, depending on how you state it. And then conclusions, we see that we need present simple tense, we need future tense, because we are recommending what future researchers should do. But future research may or will focus on ABC, or should focus on ABC. Still, with future tense, if you're talking about the significance of the research, you can use, in your report, you can use both. Future tense can be used both in the proposal and the report. Because when you're talking about the significance of your study, you're telling the reader what your study will result into. Maybe once the study is done, the study will contribute to ABC. The study will enable policy formulation. So that is why in the way I said the entire report should be, we shouldn't expect somebody to have future tense, but the subsection for significance of the study will have future tense, because you're telling the reader what benefits will be obtained from the study after it is conducted. So for the different parts of the report, because here these tenses are desired in the report, not the proposal. We said the entire proposal should be in future tense, meaning the tenses we are looking at here are for the proposal. Are for the report and not the proposal. Any questions so far? Any questions?
Well, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if my topic happens to be similar to my fellow student or someone that is already doing research?
Topics can never be similar. So if you have, unless you're doing in a different context, that maybe the other person is doing in the health sector and for you doing in the manufacturing sector, it happens. And that will depend on the supervisor. Like for me, I've ever given students similar topics. They are being supervised by the same people, myself and Dr. Bonnie. We gave them similar topics. Even when he asked me, he said, but Sheila, these people have similar what? Topics. Then I told him, but their contexts are different. I don't expect them to have similar findings.
Whatever.
And request for areas where our students could contribute in terms of research. And they gave me the areas. I just haven't shared the FDSR, such that also students can do research in that line, and then in solving the current problems we have. Because we said that the manager capacity building, Mrs. Mariam Baluka, wanted people to see how the people are doing their research, but she gave me the areas. So I will share with FGSR and also those people who have received or identified context for research, and then they by the members of capacity building. So we active voice. I don't know that Peter has something to say. Or Peter, do you?
Good evening, Prof, and good evening, colleagues.
Good evening.
Yes, I have two questions. One is that I'm trying to look at the participation of the special interest groups in public procurement. And the question I have is that if I have a report, for example, I have this report, the Auditor General's report 2025,
Yes.
that expose that out of the 65 entities which were sampled, provisions by the law of, for example, reserving 15% of their procurement. The 15% annual entity procurement plan to these groups. Can that, work? Is it enough to justify a problem? That is one question.
That one is current. 2025 is current. It can work.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then also now that leads me to the second question. You mentioned about articles that we're going to base on to be recent, right? Current, actually. Yeah, so which years are we talking about? In years, for example?
In terms of years, if we have 2020 and above, that would be okay. But you find there are certain aspects or variables that could have fewer articles in these years, but you see the publications could be scattered in various years. So those ones, as long as you have a mix, then you're good to go. But we have situations where students get articles and they copy exactly what is in those articles. And how we discover is that the years are old. They're old years.
Okay.
But if somebody did a good literature review, then we expect even to have at least somewhere some new publications, like the 2023, 2024 publications, but not 1997, 1998, because we've seen people's pieces, written pieces having such years.
Okay.
So we look at active and passive voices because we say are voices that we normally find, whether in published articles or even in our pieces, we could use it unknowingly. And we are saying that with the active voice, you find that it is the subject that receives the action, while and here we have an example of enforcement, where if it is the government enforcing these strict environmental regulations, then they will be the ones receiving the actions there. They are now engaging in the action, and then while the passive, you find that the in the passive, you find that the subject receives the action, and then in the active, still the subject does the action. So government is the subject that will do the action, while in the passive voice, you see that it is the subject that is receiving the action. So when we see maybe, because we have situations where these are coming, like in I refer to my PhD work where I had environmental regulations and was talking about government enforcement and then government developing stringent environmental regulations such that, because my focus was on manufacturing firms, such that manufacturing firms could be forced to comply. So we can find that while I was talking about government developing stringent environmental regulations and then strengthening the enforcement aspect, so I was using active voice. So we say that is what the subject will do. And then passive, we find that the subject receives the actions. And then we have examples where we are saying under passive that strict environmental regulations are enforced by government. So we are seeing the subject receiving the action when we say they are enforced by a government. And then while in active, we are saying that government enforces, meaning the subject has to do the action. So it is just the opposite, that active is the opposite of passive. And then normally active voice, we find that we shall find it in introductions, what our subsections intend to have. And then in results, normally we have active voice, more so when we are discussing our findings. And then while if we are to focus on, say, still on results in some proportion, we still have passive. And then also in the method section, we normally have passive voice. That if we are going to look at certain parts, we shall have these the sample dissertations to look at the methods and see, and then we shall be able to identify the kind of voice that was used. Though earlier researchers recommend that it should be passive voice, whereby the subject receives the action. And yet in active voice, we are saying the subject does the action. So in these other things like discussion, you find that those things come out automatically. So I'm going to have, then next time we shall have those articles where we shall be able to identify that this is active voice, this is passive voice, in addition to the different tenses. Because when you look at these articles, you're able to identify once you have the knowledge with you. So still in the characteristics of the literature review, we said if we are to link one paragraph to another, or if we are to link one sentence to another, we need transition words. I know there are some that may not be here, but I have some examples and when they should be used. that if you want to make additional comments or ideas on something, you could say, for example, additionally, I have articles and you can see how these things, if you want to explain the point, but you have to add another point in relation to what you've earlier explained, you can say additionally, or some say in addition, then others would use also, moreover, more so, furthermore, again, further, then, besides, to, similarly, correspondingly, indeed, and then regarding ABC, and then you explain. Or in regards to ABC, and then you explain. Because there are people you find using the same term further throughout. So that further becomes monotonous. But if you keep on changing the terms, then the work becomes interesting. Then alternatives, that if you want to divert away from maybe the earlier idea, and maybe you can say, whereas maybe the earlier researchers support ABC, ordinarily this is what maybe is happening. Conversely, then you explain, or in comparison, maybe to the earlier findings, maybe these findings show ABC, or they make a contribution to ABC. And then others could say by contrast, if it's an alternative, another view, alternatively, although, otherwise, instead, etc. And then we have analyzing results, that attempts in the discussion for the analysis, maybe after stating the results and looking at their implications, then we can say, therefore, the results show that ABC, or the results show that an improvement in this, therefore the results show that an improvement in this variable may result into maybe good performance. Then accordingly, I have an article which I can share where they used this. Then as a result, very common in the presentation and discussion of results, the result is, or the results are maybe consistent with earlier research, earlier findings, or earlier researchers' findings. And then the consequence is, basing on the results, maybe if the results maybe are showing the negative, maybe the independent variable is reducing the outcome, the outcomes in the dependent variable, then we could say that if this is, if the results are this, the consequence is blah, 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 maybe something has to be done. Otherwise, we could have maybe poor performance, then resulting from, then you could say that maybe the significant impact is resulting from. Then, of course, we've already talked about consequently, then another part, but it is also used here. It can be seen, evident illustrates that because of this, thus, hence, for this reason, owing to, blah, blah, then this suggests that it follows that, otherwise, etc. Then if you're giving or discussing a cause or reason, you can still say as a result of, because of ABC, because of this, and then you explain, and then comparing, you can say in comparison, or compared with, in the same way, likewise, similarly, etc. And still in alternatives, you can say unlike maybe the earlier researchers, and then you explain. And then contrasts, if you're bringing something different, you can say by contrast, although, compared with, conversely, despite, however, nevertheless, yet, if you're providing a different argument. And then we have other transitional words, where we have, if you're presenting an effect or result, you can say as a result, therefore, thus, And then if you're emphasizing earlier statements, you can say use however, nonetheless, furthermore. In others, even nevertheless, in the final analysis, despite or despite the fact, notwithstanding X, in spite of X, while X may be true, etc. Nevertheless, I've already talked about it, although, though, after all, at the same time, even if X is true, or even if it counts, etc. So we don't want people to use similar transitional words, or like say somebody uses one transitional word throughout. Because I've seen an article where somebody used meanwhile several times. I was highlighting the transitional words used. So however was commonly used, and yet we have several other transitional terms we could use, or transitional words. Then if you're introducing examples, you could say, for instance, for example, namely, such as follows, as exemplified by, such as, that is repeated, including, especially, particularly, in particular, notably, mainly, and in the article I have, particularly has been used, especially has been used, even for instance and for example, have been used, even such as. And then we have rephrasing, and where you can say in other terms or in other words that you've written a sentence, but you want to draw more clarity on what you've said earlier. You could use that one in other terms, in other words, rather, or better in view of this, or in contrast. And then if you're sequencing, which is very common in literature review, and I think the same paper I identified today had this, where if you're going to discuss, maybe you're discussing a subsection, and you're having, say for example, for those people who use normally the people who use normally what we call the indicators, because you're going to find that at times you may have a dependent variable and an independent variable. But if you're to do a direct search on literature done on your independent and the dependent, that literature may be hard to get. So what normally do? We move from the independent, which is the global variable, to the dimensions. Dimensions, or that is if it's a multidimensional construct. Or if it's a unidimension, we look at the several aspects they use to measure that variable. We shall look at that because I know some of you will have multidimensional variables and then others will have unidimensional variables. That multidimensional, say for example, if you are looking at entrepreneurial orientation, you can say it is a multidimensional variable because it is measured using proactiveness, innovativeness, risk-taking, or other scholars use risk-taking or risk-taking intensity or propensity, and then others use, and then also competitiveness, or others would use competitive aggressiveness. So each of those components has items below it, which we call statements. But it will be uni when we don't have those different extra subvariables, but we have only specific aspects we look at. So you're going to find that in such situations, if the literature is scarce, when we are to look at the relationship between the independent and the dependent, then we will move a bit down, where we say let's get the relationship between the independent and the components of the dependent variable. If we cannot get literature that directly speaks the relationship between the independent and the dependent, we use the dependent, the relationship between the independent and the dimensions of the dependent variable. So that is why in the literature, when we are writing, if we are relating the independent, we are saying we are looking at the relationship, say, between information sharing and entrepreneurial orientation. Then we shall look at the relationship between information sharing and maybe proactiveness, information sharing and risk-taking propensity or risk-taking information. Then the relationship between information sharing and innovativeness, till when we reach the last dimension. Then here, if we are to write the literature between information sharing and entrepreneurial orientation, then we shall say maybe the relationship sharing and entrepreneurial orientation can be explained using the dimensions of entrepreneurial orientation. Then we say firstly, the relationship between information sharing and maybe proactiveness in earlier research. Maybe we can say earlier research. Firstly, earlier research has shown that there is a link between, say, for example, information sharing and, say, proactiveness, which is a dimension for entrepreneurial orientation, and then we explain. But you can use the firstly, secondly, or thirdly for each of the links between, say, for example, if you're looking at the relationship between information sharing and the dimensions of entrepreneurial orientation, when we've already stated it in our topic sentence. So that is when you use the firstly, secondly, thirdly, that the order, even the order in which you bring out the variables or the dimensions in your topic sentence will be the same order in which they will be presented in that subsection. So these ones, the sequence is normally used in the background and the literature review section. Very common. So others use another. Additionally, these are common. Additionally, another, these are also common in other sections. Well, firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, fifthly, whatever you want are common in the background and the literature review section, but it doesn't mean that even in other sections they cannot be used. They can be used. And then moreover, finally, also, subsequently, eventually, next, etc. And then we have, when we are writing our summary or conclusions, most people say in conclusion. Everywhere in conclusion, in conclusion, in conclusion. But here we see that you could say in conclusion, therefore, to conclude on the whole, hence, thus to summarize altogether, overall, following the research, maybe after the analysis, to sum up, others even in summation, to mean conclusion. So you can't expect somebody to have this in conclusion word being monotonous throughout the dissertation. So those are transitional words that you could use while moving from one sentence to another, or from one paragraph to another. Then we had also other, let me see, linking words. These could be within our normal sentence writing. The conjunction words that link maybe different words in a sentence, where some of them we have for, and, nor, others use neither, but, how, or, yet, so etc. You may find many conjunction words that they link words within a sentence. And here we see what for may, what would be the function for, where we will say it connects a reason to a result. So this is normal, which normally flows in our daily language, communication, writing, though when it comes to literature, that is what they say. And then and connects equal and similar ideas, nor connects to negative ideas. And then but or however connects equal but different ideas, or connects to equal choices, yet connects equal by and contrasting ideas, and then so connects a result to the reason. So we normally have these in our articles or in our pieces of writing, but we don't know why. But for us, it becomes normal that anybody who has studied in English can construct these sentences using these conjunctions, and they know how to effectively use them. The only challenge has been with the transitional words or the transitional terms, where it becomes hard for people to link a different sentences and then link one paragraph to another paragraph. Even when you go overseas, it is something that is common, that people find it hard to link a paragraph to another and then a sentence to another sentence. For me, I can tell you that when I was doing my PhD, my supervisor was surprised that I was able to do all, to link paragraphs and then to link sentences, because they know it is a common problem for many academic writers. Because if you don't do that, it will affect the flow of your discussion. You find that somewhere there is a disconnection or a disconnect in the ideas that are being brought up. But when you use this, you learn how to use the things rightly, then the work will flow very well. So those are the linking words or conjunction words. Though I said that is simple, the challenge is more on the transitional words that people run out of words to use while connecting sentences and then while connecting paragraphs. So that is all with academic writing. That is all. So unless members have questions, we are going to, I'll go, but not today. Next time, I'll go through, I'll get a sample article or articles, and then I show you what we've talked about. And you'll see these things physically. And you'll know that these things are real, and sometimes people run out of words to use. Like I've said, there's one who was using however throughout almost, and then meanwhile throughout, meaning this person went out of the transitional words that could be used or transitional terms. But these others, he used them, the conjunction words were used very well, but the transitional terms were insufficient. He could use a term several times, however, meanwhile, several times. So any questions? Please, Emmanuel.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Good evening, Prof, and good evening, class.
Good evening.
Yes, thank you for all you are presented to us. One thing to clarify for me or class about the issue to do with the supporting the gap or the problem. You talked about reaching out to 3 people, if I'm not mistaken. Could you please highlight more on this and how this can be done? For example, if you have seen something but I cannot find any publications or reports about it, or to support that claim or that gap or problem, which people should I go to, and how do I present that to support that claim or that problem I want to address? Thank you.
Okay, so when you're going to do your research, one, you identify your unit of analysis. Your unit of analysis could be a firm or an individual, but it is your variables, most of the dependent variable that determines your unit of analysis, whether it is a firm or an individual. Where you're going to find that even when the unit of analysis is a firm, it would be better that even the independent variables be firm level variables, because it would be disturbing for an academician or researcher to have one variable being firm level and the other being individual level variables. So if the unit of analysis is a firm, say for example manufacturing firms, Then after identifying the unit of analysis, which could be a pump, that is where the main study would be done. Then we have to go to the unit of inquiry. Those are the people who are going to respond to your questionnaires or who are going to participate in your study. So if I'm to go to manufacturing firms, say for example, if my work is on SME, small and medium enterprises, I would say maybe the owner manager is sufficient to respond to my questionnaire. So if I know that I will be engaging with owner managers, so when I want to get my problem, the problem on the dependent, because the problem should be focused on the dependent. We want to know what is wrong with your dependent variable out there. If my dependent is farm performance, we want to know what is wrong with farm performance in the industry of your own choice. Maybe what is wrong with if I'm looking at manufacturing firms, I would like to know what is wrong with farm performance in these manufacturing firms where my study is focused. So if there are SMEs, I said maybe we say the unit of analysis are owner managers. So I will get my dependent variable. But you must be well conversant on how it is measured. That if you say, if I'm looking at supply chain performance, if I'm asked to explain good supply chain performance, which indicators will I use to explain? Or which indicators will I use to identify that there is good supply chain performance? So I should have the indicators for the dependent variable, or I should be well versed on how my dependent variable is measured. So when I'm going out to do the interviews with the selected individuals in the firms, if the firm is my unit of analysis, I will be engaging them based on the measures I have identified in the literature. If say for supply chain we have order fill rate, maybe we have customer satisfaction, then I'll be asking them that to tell me on maybe whether the customers in the world are satisfied with their products and what problems are they encountering, or what comments could they be getting from there, what feedback could they be getting from their customers, which maybe could not be good, or which negative or comments are they receiving from their customers, maybe how often or how many orders have they fulfilled in time. If it's responsiveness, how openly have they responded to customer orders, maybe what challenges have they experienced in fulfillment of customer orders. So you base on your dependent variable. Yes, Emmanuel? Emmanuel, your hand is up.
Yes, sorry, it's the one I raised initially to ask the question. Thank you for the explanation.
So I have Frank. So your problem should be on your dependent. You should go out knowing how your dependent can be measured. So you derive questions to obtain the problem your dependent, but you use the measure. Yes, Frank?
Thank you, Prof. My question is about, you've been talking about manufacturing firm. If are you supposed to make your research, if you're into manufacturing firm, are you supposed to just like one type, I use like a type, let's say you're supposed to do all the research directly on factories that deal in beverages only, or you do going in other or firms that are dealing in let's say steel, for example, either steel and steel like so you're supposed to on a certain type of manufacturing firm. That is my question. Thank you.
One, you look at the the unit of analysis. Saying don't look at manufacturing firms. And maybe if you're interested in beverage, well, that is why you've identified the problem. Then you could look at how many beverage companies do we have. If they're less than 30, which is the minimum number required for a quantitative study, then you would rather try other firms such that you're able to meet the required number. Because if you have a population below 30 or below 30, your statistics cannot be taken to be valid. Neither will your research be accepted. So that is why we say 30 and above are enough. But even when it comes to publishing, journal editors normally even not interested in that research where, say, the unit of analysis is 30. They normally want 100 plus or even 50 plus. So that is why it is the population statistics that will tell you whether to add on more farms or you concentrate on a given segment of farms. But I know beverage farms are many. There are many, at least I've supervised students who have done, even myself have done research in beverage farms. So I know the number is sufficient. But say if those who are going to do the reservation, things where you're looking at the youths, you're looking at the persons with disabilities and the women. I know I had to struggle with one of my students, though at times he quoted a number that was below 30. And when I told him that this work cannot pass, then I wrote to PPDA to provide me a list with the list of those farms. And at least there were more than 30, and this student now could continue with his research. But if they were still below 30, he was not going to proceed. So we look at the study population. If it's more than 30 and more, then you can proceed. But if not, then you will post to also embrace or include other companies such that you have a sufficient population from which your sample will be drawn. So I don't know who is this, Musenero Manjeri? Yes?
Okay, Doctor, thank you so much for the lecture. I've been following closely with the issue of us conducting some interviews with some prospects. So I'm wondering, in our previous lecture, in our first lecture, we talked about our research being quantitative. So under which circumstances, how can we report the findings of the qualitative responses that we have gathered in the due course of our research?
Here, the qualitative is only meant for the problem statement. Because if you fail to get a current source, I assure you, every supervisor will tell you to go and get primary data. You get the actual problem through engaging those owners or your unit of inquiry to tell you what problems they're actually having in relation with the dependent you would be examining. And that is only put in the problem statement, and there's a certain small part of the background where we are talking about the problem in these farms. Otherwise, there is nowhere else you're going to use that information, nowhere. It's only in the areas where we're stating our problem. That is when we use it. But if you're saying you're going to go qualitative, the research may be heavy for you if you're going to use a mixed study. And then also, you'll have to have others, like I know some people want propositions, though you'll have to have an interview guide that is conclusive or comprehensive to cover up or that would be able to use to collect even the information on each and every research objective you have. But here our main aim is to understand the problem. If we cannot get a source for our problem, then we have to obtain through interviews. Yes, Ma'am Abakar.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening, class. I have a concern with the research gap. Like the two things, a genuine research gap and then a general problem. That how do I get to distinguish between a genuine research gap and simply a problem that is existing in practice?
A genuine research gap is obtained from the review of the literature. As a review of the literature, that is when you identify the research gap. It can never be similar to a problem. A problem is what is wrong out there. If I'm saying I'm studying performance as my dependent, what is wrong with the performance in a given, say if you're looking at manufacturing firms, what is wrong with the performance of manufacturing firms? We want to see that problem. But a gap is identified through the review of the literature. And we are going to see this. So we proceed. We are looking at literature review now, where we're seeing that it is a critical synthesis of existing works, that every concept almost has been examined. So we are able to look at what is existing, and then we are able to identify the research gaps, or we are able to identify the level of development of the given aspect or a given body of literature on a given subject. So here, basically, you're going to be reading. So people who don't want to read, this is where I get challenges. Because with literature review, you have to read. To write a good background, you have to read. For you to give us good literature, you have to read a well-written piece. So you find that literature review can be conducted on one. We have written books. There are those books that are published online, the e-books. We have scholarly articles, which we call the journal articles, and any other sources that could be relevant to a particular issue of research somebody may be interested in examining. So we're going to find that the majority of the scholars use scholarly articles. Those are the journal articles. The majority of us look out for journal articles. Then we look out for reports, say World Bank reports, UN reports, when we want to support or strengthen our problem, or if they help us in writing our problem, and also when we are discussing our findings, because we said there is a level you reach when you have to support your findings using contextual evidence. So that is why we use, at times we go an extra mile and use reports more if we are supporting our findings contextually. That we can't just say that there is a relationship between information sharing and supply chain performance, and then we say that these are supported by findings from research, and then we stop there. We have to go deep and see why are the results so. If I'm getting a positive relationship, why are they so? What contextual aspects could have led to us receiving such results? And then we have the purpose of doing a literature review. Some people may not understand why people put emphasis on reviewing the literature review. So one, we want to understand previous work on the concept being studied. What has been done? If they are like we are saying, we want to get our research gap. We want to see if I'm looking at, say, green supply chain performance or farm performance in the supply chain. What has been done in relation to that? We want to understand the existing works on that subject. And then in the due course, we are revealing the gaps that exist. That as I'm looking at what has been done in those published articles, I'm also looking at the areas of further research. Normally, the areas of further research are found towards the end of the paper, next to the references. down there, maybe after the conclusion, that is where we normally find areas of further research that are being suggested by the scholars. But we would prefer if the area of further research is obtained from a currently published article, say 2026, 2025. Well, for 2025, we would even be forced to write back to the publisher or the author to confirm whether they did not proceed with examining the variables suggested in their area of further research. And then we want to find the theoretical foundations for their study. What theories did they use? And what theories are they suggesting to be tested or used in the examination of the same variable? And then we want to identify areas of prior scholarship to prevent duplication efforts. That we don't want to do the same studies, because if I did the same study, because not conducting or doing the literature synthesis, somebody may end up doing or conducting the same research that has been done by earlier researchers. Then when you reach presenting, then somebody will ask you, what contribution are you making to knowledge? If you are examining something that has already been examined, that means you're not making any contribution to knowledge. So that is why we do these literature reviews, to find out whether what we want also to study has not been examined by earlier researchers. I skipped this, the analytical features of a literature review, where we see that a literature review, once conducted, will give a new interpretation of prior research or combine new with old interpretations. Here we mean that, say for example, if the earlier research was done in a different sector, so if I do it in a sector different from where the earlier research has been done initially, then you're going to find that, one, we can combine the new and then with the old interpretations. Maybe we can say, yes, there is some commonality. Or if it is done in the same sector, there are certain variables which may require longitudinal studies. Say, for example, if somebody is examining behavioral adoption, because we know behavior changes, that we may find today that they have positive behavior, and then years pass and they have negative behavior. So we are advised to go back to conduct the same studies to find out. So we're going to find that here, maybe by the time you go back, there's a difference in the results. And then that is when a new interpretation could also be given on what has been observed. Initially, what were the findings, and then on going back to conduct the same study, what were the findings. And then we find that here with literature reviews, we are able to see the progression in terms of the intellectual body of knowledge for a given subject area. We could be able to identify what are the major debates and what are unresolved understandings. Unresolved understandings now could be the conflicts that we see the scholars have maybe are conflicting in terms of their findings. So because of the conflicting findings, that means that further research has to be done to find out or to confirm the findings. So if we have conflicting findings, or if we see that there are debates in a given field, then that could give maybe a person interested in research examining why the debates, and then maybe getting a common ground. Like, so when we had honors doing my PhD, still I used, I think I was one of the first students to use pragmatism as a research approach. And when I went to read about pragmatism, I found an article on the paradigm moves where there was a strong debate between the interpretists, those are the qualitative, people interested in qualitative, and then those that were interested in the quantitative, those were the positivists. And there was a strong debate. So this scholar came up with a common ground where he introduced the pragmatism paradigm, that this paradigm could enable a researcher to choose the best philosophical orientation or research approach that could provide answers to the research questions. So due to the debates that were existing between the people who are more interested in quantitative research and then others in qualitative research, he came up with a middle ground where he established pragmatism. So a researcher could do the same. If they look at the debates, then they can identify an area of further research. So we look at the level of development in terms of knowledge in a given field. Say, for example, if it's supply chain, then we look at the major debates. What are the major debates today in the area of green supply chains or sustainability supply chains? So for example, we can say what are the major debates in the area of sustainable public procurement, and what are the unresolved aspects or understandings which a researcher could venture into. And then we look at the sources to be used during the review. We find that for us, we are very selective when it comes to the articles to be used. The articles we don't read. And for me, I have specific journal sites or publishing houses. Those articles I read. I say I read articles from this publishing house, this, and this. I will not read articles from the other publishing house, and I have reasons as to why I do so. I'm selective. And even when you go overseas, even some universities like Stellenbosch, they also, even UNISA, University of South Africa, they specify the articles somebody has to read. So we find that for some like UNISA, even before you read an article, you first go to their site and find out whether that is one of the articles listed before you waste your time reading it and then citing it. Though in MOOCs we are a bit silent. And then the other last point is we have to, with the literature review, it is conducted for purposes of identifying gaps. What could be the missing gaps? What aspects have not been studied? What are the unresolved issues which somebody could continue maybe doing own research? And then what are the heavily debated aspects? Which aspects maybe could require getting a neutral position? Like I've given an example of the paradigm moves, where the positivists, the other people interested in quantitative research, who are fighting with the interpretivists. Those are the people who are interested in qualitative research. Then this scholar came out with a middle ground, and that was pragmatism. And when they introduced pragmatism, the paradigm was, all those huge debates on who wins ended. And now most people use the pragmatism research approach, or others use it as a paradigm. Yes, Daya? So Daya, you can ask your question.
Thank you.
The next types of literature reviews, yes?
Thank you.
Question.
Thank you, Prof, for the lecture. My question was the lecture. What criteria do you use to select the articles to be reviewed? Because I heard you saying that some articles from some particular houses you don't review.
Yes, I don't read them because their houses are ranked as predatory, meaning they should be having poor quality articles. A publishing house that takes 3 days to publish a paper, that means that that paper is poor quality. So that is why for us, we don't just read anything, but we look at the publishing houses. Like I read Wiley, I read InterScience, I read Emerald, I read Springer. So there are those houses that we see that they give enough time to review the article prior to it being published online. You will find that even some articles are full of errors, but because the publishing house takes a week or 2 weeks or 3 days to have that paper online. So when you go to those developed nations, even the supervisors will tell you, I want articles from A-ranked journals that use articles from A-ranked journals. Though here we don't do that. We'll be giving a burden to people because even access to these articles is a problem. You leave it open, but in the developed world, they even specify, the supervisor will say, I want you to review articles from A-ranked journals or Academy of Management journals. So we are stopping here. Next time we shall look at the types of literature reviews and then sample journal articles, but you should also, as we discussed, because some of the things I'm discussing can help you begin drafting something. Because with this literature review, maybe we shall just look at how to strengthen and how we can identify the gaps. But some of the gaps could be methodological, others theoretical, others could be basically on areas of further research, what the current scholars are recommending. But I said it all begins with your dependent variable you've chosen. We begin from the dependent and then we work backwards. So any questions? Because I'm stopping here. Any questions? So I'm going to request everyone to send me the context and the dependence on my WhatsApp. I want each one to send me their dependent variables. Dependent only and the context that I'm doing in supply chain, this is my dependent.
Pro?
Yes?
Yes, literature review, can you do it around the findings?
Literature review?
Yes.
The findings?
Yes.
Maybe if you want to get more, but the literature review we do is contextual for the reports, because we said normally we want, somebody may ask you why the findings are so. Or if you're told to explain your findings, that yes, you're finding a positive relationship between information sharing and supply chain performance. You may not use the scholars that have done research from other nations or contexts. Your discussion will be strengthened by what is on ground. That is why we do in reports.
Like when I'm doing the literature review matrix, can I view papers specifically around the findings in those papers?
I'll show you in the literature review matrix. One, some people want the references, or you may cite the author. They want the abstract. They want the topic. They want the method. They want the theory that was used, then the findings, and then areas of further research.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, so we meet next week to complete the types of literature reviews and then to go practical. Now, because now we have to begin. So I wish you a good night.
Thank you, Prof. Have a good night.
Thank you.